What does the incarnation mean for God's immutability? I think I know what it's saying.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've mentioned already that there was a time when God did not have a physical body. And then we've referred to what's called the Incarnation, when John says in John 1:14, the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. The idea being the eternal Godhead that had eternally existed in three persons. One of those persons came and became a physical fleshly person, or assumed a physical fleshly body. What does that say about the immutability of God is the question. And it's a good question. It's a very good question. Because you could say, well, wait a minute. If God didn't have a physical body before, and now he had a physical body, that's an instance of change, right? You changed. So if you changed, you're no longer immutable. If you're immutable, you're no longer God. But I would say that's a misunderstanding of what the incarnation itself represents. If you look up above us, Michael's designed the arch here, not just because it looks pretty and really cool above the fireplace, but to represent an important and even crucial element in theology.
I don't know if they can get that on the camera.
Oh yeah, you may not be able to. Arch looks like this. The idea is God himself, in his essence, exists outside the arch, and everything below the arch represents what we know as space, time, history, and matter. Anything that's physical, anything that happens within time, time itself, anything that happens within space, all that we know of the created material universe is the stuff below the arch. So God, in his essence, has eternally existed above the arch. All three persons of the Trinity have eternally existed above the arch. So what happened at the incarnation? Did God change? Is he no longer immutable? Does that prove that he's not immutable? The Christian message would say that what happened in the moment of the incarnation, when Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, came down to earth and took upon him a physical body, God's essence still never changed. The second person of the Trinity still never changed. What happened was a union took place between that eternal God in his essence and the physical realm that he'd created. Early church historians and church theologians would talk about, they divide human history into before the union and after the union. And you'll come across that phrase a lot as you're reading the writing. They'll say, well, before the union, this was the case. What are they talking about? Before the incarnation. Well, after the union, this was the case. Because they understood an essential part of the Christian message is that when God became flesh, his essence never changed above the arch. But in Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity was unified with humanity and took upon him human flesh, like we talked about Chalcedon a moment ago. And so they would say from that point forward, the second person of the Trinity is still fully God in an unchanged essence, but has also been joined to man and is now and always will be fully man. So I would say it doesn't change the immutability of God at all in his essence, in his above the archness. But it says an incredible thing about the God who would come to those he's made below the arch and would become one of them in order to redeem them.
And that was very almost sermon type, slowly moving towards the end, even though I have two things to add there. I would say, number one, about that question, I would say I have no idea. I really don't. I don't understand how the eternal essence of God in his essence can communicate in any sense in time, especially becoming incarnate. One of our C.S. Lewis was one time asked, not that he was a theologian, but he was a very great philosopher and apologist, but he was asked what's the hardest question he knows of in Christianity, and this was it. It wasn't how did God make everything from nothing. It wasn't how was the Trinity three persons yet one essence. It was how did the eternal second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, become incarnate. So just validating the difficulty of that question, first of all. And then I'd add second that even the reformers talked about this and even articulated it more whenever they were trying to show how Christ, even though he was here on the earth, still existed above the arch in his essence, timeless and spaceless, eternal, never changing. And they had a phrase that was finitum non carpax infinitum. The finite, finitum, could not contain the infinitum of Christ. So even in his finite incarnation, that did not contain Christ. It didn't contain everything that he was because he was still existing as the eternal God, unchanged in his essence in any sense. How do we explain that? I don't know how to explain it, but I do know, as he said and explained very well, what has to be true, that Christ has to be eternal, unchanged, always existing above the arch, yet at the same time becoming incarnate and existing as the second person of the Trinity eternally under the arch, yet not being contained by the arch. Still eternal, still in his unchanged form.